So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Chris Mathews.
Thank you.
So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Can I just make the apology for the massive Starbucks malfunction this morning? I'm keeping hold of this one, so I don't normally dress in a shirt that I've looked like I've had on for 3 days.
Yeah, I've not seen Chris for about a year, and his first message to me when he came up between the rate was, "Do you have a spare white shirt?" Anyway. So, coffee misdemeanors aside, start, Chris, tell us a little bit about the business, or Silverlink specifically. What does it do?
Yeah, so Silverlink Clinics is a private health clinic. We specialise in treating patients with clinical and morbid obesity. So we're a premium priced private clinic. We don't have any NHS funding. And we started in 2011, actually opened in 2011, pretty much at the height of the recession, and in what Paul has described this morning in the northeast is one of the more socially deprived areas. So to open what would you could only consider a premium priced weight loss clinic, it's £1,000 a month for the treatment. At the height of the recession in the poorest area of the country, as a business plan, was not probably like the smartest thing to do. And the passion came from me. I'd been well over 20 stone, pretty fed up about it, and accidentally came across this weight loss treatment that we ultimately now offer at our clinics. I used it to lose 7 stone 2 pounds in 20 weeks, and basically came back I was on a flight back from Dubai. I was a project manager. I put all this weight on. I was a project manager travelling the world. Coming back on a flight from Dubai, and I just thought, God, I've not seen the kids for 6 weeks again. You know, I'd run a project for some very ungrateful people. You know, I'd turned this project round. We got it back on track, delivered it on time, came back, not a word of thanks. I sat on Emirates, business class, flying back. I just think, God, there's got to be more to life than this. I'd lost all this weight. I've got a new zest for life. And I walked back in the door, dropped my bag down and said to Rach, my wife of 20 years at the time, I'm doing something else. I'm done with this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm having an adult gap year. Like I'm having a year off. Don't know what I'm going to do. But I promise you by your birthday, this was November, so I promise by your birthday in March, I'll have like a clear plan. She says, "Oh, you're having a midlife crisis, don't you?" I says, "No, it's not, honestly, it's not a midlife crisis." So I said, "All right, okay, well, I'll decide." So I looked round, I thought, what do I do? I'd obviously got this new zest for life with being 7 stone less than I was, 6 months earlier. And I said, well, I want to help people not be as miserable as I was when I was 20 stone. So I approached the people who treated me and said, can I open a clinic? And the lady who was a doctor, who's a Dutch doctor who ran it, said, they said, you need to speak to her. She's the master franchisee for Europe. It's her invention. She has ultimate say over whether you can open a business. So I spoke to her, and this is the first lesson I learned, is don't take no for an answer. She said, yes, you can. Yes, I have heard about you. You've done very well. I'm not going to attempt the Dutch accent. She says, you've done very well, I understand, on your weight loss program. I am happy for you to open a clinic. Where did you do your medical degree? It's that's like first little stumbling block. She says, well, actually, Dr. Vandals, I'm not a medical doctor, but I do believe I've got the passion, the enthusiasm, and more importantly, some money put to one side to actually open a clinic. I have never let anybody have my treatment who's not a doctor. So I said, okay. So can you make an exception? No, absolutely not. So this is when, as a salesman, the sales process only starts when you get a no. So I started persisting, and eventually I persuaded the halfway ground was, look, I'm not a doctor, but what if I take on a business partner who's a doctor? And she eventually succumbed to that. What she actually said, the truth of the story is, after 6 months of ringing her pretty much once a week, she was starting to get just worn down and ground down with it. And I phoned her one day, and I remember vividly the conversation. I said, hello, Claudia, it's Chris again. I've got a doctor now. She says, right, I will agree, you can have a clinic on the strict understanding that you stop ringing me. Never spoke to her again until we got the clinic open and she came to do our training for a doctor. And that was opening. We opened the clinic in 4th of July 2011 with 2 rooms, 2 staff, an IKEA desk as a reception desk, a card machine that in order to test the card machine when the man came on the first day to install the card machine, I had to borrow the card of the brand new receptionist who she'd never even worked it because I'd forgotten my wallet, so she's having to test our new card machine by putting her credit card in and putting her own money in.
It's an expensive first day.
It's an expensive first day at work. Then we'd treat the refund process. And from 2011, we very slowly built the business up to, for that first year, I'll be honest, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. All I knew about running a weight loss clinic was that I'd been overweight. And I'd got some systems and I was good with systems and processes and automating stuff, and I liked software, so I got stuck into some clinic management software. And we built what I call, and probably one of the most important books I think I've probably ever read, was Built to Sell. And that basically informed John Warrillow, John Warrillow, Built to Sell. That book, probably along with the E-Myth, set out how I wanted to build the business, so I wasn't ever going to be a slave again to the business as I had been for 20 years, 10 years in senior level in project management, where it was, I needed to be there, I needed to turn up every day and swap my time for money. And I'd sworn and I'd committed to Rach, that I wouldn't do that again, that I'd actually build something of value over the next period of time.
And in some respects, it was probably an advantage because because it's medically supervised weight loss program, you weren't a doctor, so you couldn't be facing the client on that basis.
Completely.
And neither were you a therapist trained in
delivering
machines.
the machine, delivering the therapy. So the bit I could add value with to the business, as Dan quite rightly says, I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a therapist, but I could do the systems and I understood the administration, and because particularly of the book Built to Sell, I knew I wanted to systemize the business. And I probably didn't document the process that I've now realised I use in pretty much every project I've ever run, until I went on a mastermind course. In fact, it was with Dan at Strategic Coach actually, where we documented how I as an individual approach a project, and there were 5 steps that I identified that I used all the time, almost subconsciously, and it was simplify, systemize, automate, monitor and manage, in that order. And then I just went round that circle again. So what I realised when I look back is all the time I was looking to simplify the systems that we'd been told, this is how you do it, this is how you run a clinic, because it wasn't a franchise as such. The franchisor at the time called it a franchise, but really it was more of a license. So you got the ability, a license to deliver Alivare therapy. The actual experience that you were delivering in your own clinic, that was pretty much down to you. When you're in the therapy room, the therapy had to be delivered in a particular way, but outside of that, there was no other system or process for sales, for marketing, for HR, for patient maintenance, for support, for patient support. And we basically created all that because I didn't want a business that was completely reliant on me being there.
So just to dive in, because I know it's going to come up later and it's pretty relevant for context. How did the business model work in the sense of, so you said that Alivare was licensed right to use, but how did they make money?
Yeah, so the treatment consists of 4 elements. A nutrition program, which is comprised of a food product which comes in sachets, so think like soups, bars, shakes.
So like meal replacement.
Meal replacement type product. A very simplified version, which if anybody wants more, I'll explain after. But a meal replacement product, that's where the franchisor made their money. So basically, buy it for one price, sell it on to the clinics for another price, and then we sell that on to our patients as part of the program. And then the other 2 elements of the program. So we made some profit on the food product, most of the profit comes from the 2 treatments that the patients come in for each week. So the patient comes in, it's on a Wednesday, they pick up their food, 5 boxes of their food, and then they have 2 treatments, an ultrasound treatment which breaks down the fat inside the fat cells, and then a lymphatic drainage system, a mechanical massage, which is just like it's like a deep tissue massage, but it massages the fat that's been loosened by the ultrasound back into the lymphatic system. And those 2 treatments combined meant that also the skin tightens back as you lose the weight, so you're not left with piles of sagging skin hanging over the top of your trousers when you've finished.
So you
sorry, to answer the original question, yeah, we charge the clients for the whole thing. We pay for the food through the effectively a license fee on each box of food that we sell, and when we charge the patients get charged for the treatment each week.
And so let's jump sideways a little bit into a horror story. This is one of the things where I said feel to decline to answer this, but
Dan knows everything, by the way, because they're like coach for 8 years through thick and thin.
The business grew, but how is it financed? Because you've got doctors on staff and you've got a lot of medical equipment.
Yeah. So it's like lesson 101 was like business finance was not my strong point. I've now made it my strong point. In fact, I would say of my business skills that I currently possess, finance and cash flow, well, not just cash flow management, but business finance and financial literacy is definitely my number 1 skill set now, above everything else, and valued for me is valued above probably every other skill set. I can buy in most other skill sets, but financial literacy, being able to pick up and read not just a P&L, which is what I did before. My business partner was an accountant, chartered accountant. We'd gone in 50-50, and there's another story. But that process, I'd abdicated responsibility for the financial management of my company to my business partner. He was absolutely as honest and integrous as the day is long. Like literally not a penny left the business without him knowing about it, and without him sharing. This is what we're paying for. This is what it's done. But I wasn't understanding the management accounts and like what cash flow meant. So I'd spend money on marketing, and then we get to the end of the month, and Pete would say, "Bloody hell, mate, we've spent 20 grand on marketing." I say, "I know, but look at all the patients we've got." He says, "Yeah, but all those patients are paying us each week when they come, but I can't ring Bauer Media and say, can we pay you each week as our patients come in? You've spent 20 grand on marketing, on radio adverts and on bus adverts and on on magazine articles and stuff. You've spent that money, but that's due now, like in 30 days. But the patients that money attracted didn't come in until those adverts had been out there for 8 weeks, and they've only just started paying us 250 quid a week. So we've got no cash." So we must have, don't be ridiculous. So we've got loads, like we both put 100 grand each in, to get this up and running. He said, "Yeah, and where did that go?" "Well, we've got the clinic, so theirs was 80 grand of fit out." He said, "How much stock have you got?" I says, "I don't know." I said, "I think we've got quite a lot." So we had a look in the stock room, and there's like 60 grand's worth of stock. So our net inventory days was running at about 4 months. I can get this stuff pretty much on next day delivery. And I'm sat on 60 grand's worth of stock. So that 60 grand was 3 months of advertising money. So I ring, he says, "Oh, don't worry." He says, "I'll ring Bauer Media and tell them that when we've sold the stock that you've bought, we can pay them." He says, "I'm sure they'll understand." But they didn't, and I've since discovered, since learned that there's only 3 places that cash hides in your business. It's in your stock room, it's in your debtors, the people who owe you money that that you're not collecting it efficiently enough. We don't have any debtors. Short of selling crack cocaine, I couldn't get a more cash efficient business. It's like, they come in, they pay us, they go into the treatment room and they have the treatment, and they come out and they take the food and they go on the way for a week. There's not much more cash efficient. And like when I talk cash, it's like pound note cash is a pain in the backside for us, because obviously everything's medically supervised, everything's recorded. Like we end up taking cash to the bank. It costs us a fortune to get processed. So we've encouraged people now onto direct debits, little things like that, systemizing stuff. That means that patients are paying us by direct debit even before they've come in, sometimes 3 and 4 weeks in advance. And the other place cash hides is in creditors, the people you owe. Well, Pete was great. Pete had come from a background where he paid everybody the moment the thing came in. He'd write him a cheque and the cheque would go out the same day. Some moment an invoice comes in, so he knew where he was up to. You know, it's like, oh, that's genius. So we've got all this, we've got all this money, and instead of using, we pay everybody when we say we're going to pay them. So we pay them on time. So I've stretched certain suppliers till they've squeaked and said, like, no, mate, like, you're on stop until you pay us. Right, fine. I now know 78 days is your maximum amount of time. And I don't brag about that. It's like, I am using their money, but we pay them bang on time. Like, we never get phone calls saying you haven't paid us, because they know that one particular supplier, it's 78 days and oh yeah, they're fine, Silverlink, they'll get us paid on 78 days. They're never late with it, and we're not. But you've got to work those things out over time, because every pound I've got in my bank means the suppliers that I can't pay that aren't quite as, I was going to say lax with credit control. That's not true. A lot of these companies aren't lax. They just have systems and they know when it's coming in. I can use that money to better effect by spending it on advertising, and we use that capital, so the capital employed is always a lot higher. But becoming financially literate, for me, was the huge step forward.
So let me nudge you forward a little bit in time. So got Newcastle got up to speed.
Can I tell a story?
You can.
Before I'd understood cash.
Dublin Airport story?
Dublin Airport, yes. I thought I'd been out to look at buying some more equipment out from a clinic in Dublin, and I'm coming back and like the credit cards bounced. I phoned Pete. He says, we've got no money. He says, literally, we have got no money. He says, I can't put any more in. I said, I'm up to we'd been just spending on advertising to get the patients in. We'd done out another room, so we'd got the equipment was working at full capacity, but I'd just got no money. We were always seemed to be spending. We were undercapitalised all the time. Just seemed to be undercapitalised. So, and I phoned Dan in desperation. I said, mate, I am absolutely up against it. I says, I don't understand. Like, where's the money? I says, I'm bouncing up against it with credit cards. I've got like 100 grand of credit card debt now because I've just constantly reinvested. We've got this beautiful clinic all fitted out. The balance sheet, which I didn't even know what the balance. I knew what a balance sheet was. I'd heard it, in me when I was doing my MBA, but didn't really understand it. And I think a lot of business owners are in that position. They just look at the P&L, and I said, I'm making money. I said, Pete's giving me this sheet every month, this P&L thing. It's got net profit at the bottom, and we're making good net profit. Where the hell's the money? And he said, have you looked at your balance sheet? I said, don't talk fucking technical to me. I said, where's the money? He said, right, you need to come and we'll sit down and we'll go. And that's really was the start of because I was already, I think probably by that point I was already doing mastermind, but I wasn't doing one-on-one, and it was it was a big step. I mean, he's an expensive hobby, and that step up from from what I think at the time was probably like an $8,000 a year mastermind to, it was, I'm pretty sure it'd be about 15. I think he's even more than that now. He said, well, I know he's a lot more than that now. That was a massive jump for me, both mentally as well. It's like, geez, I'm investing, a huge chunk of money here with money that I didn't have, because but I knew if I didn't sit down and didn't go through this, we were going to be done in 12 months. And Pete, my business partner, was getting more and more grumpy about the situation. I wanted to expand. I wanted another room in the clinic, and I'd got a plan for expansion, but we'd not got the cash. And that was really when Dan and I started working together as closely as we do now. And there's not many days actually go by when I'm not on the phone to him now.
So let me jump forward. Let me jump to a different piece in the story. Let's talk about, because it pretty ties in with more of the theme that I want to get into as it relates to M&A, etc. What happened with the Carlisle clinics? You had Newcastle. What happened with Carlisle? So Chris's biggest challenge was that it was a capital-intensive business, took a lot of money. And whilst he was making money, in brief, the amount of debt repayments stripped out all the profit he was making. So in theory, over a longer period of time, he pays off all the debt because he used a lot of short-term debt, which was high interest and had to be paid back quickly to finance it. So there was profit but no cash. But then the challenge was, we want to open another clinic. We need a big whopping amount of money to open another clinic. And yet we found a creative solution in the context of Carlisle. So can you tell us a little bit about the story of how Carlisle came into existence?
Yeah. So the way that the Alivair franchise network worked were, like me, people could come and they for whatever reason there'd maybe been a doctor who'd seen a patient of theirs who'd had treatment and thought, wow, this is transform this patient's life. I'd like to find out more about this for other patients. Then realise there's a business opportunity and maybe go and open a clinic themselves. And a lot of doctors, particularly doctors who owned a lot of the franchise networks, and still some of them still do, they're extremely intelligent, effective clinicians, but they're institutionalised in the NHS and in the way of not understanding that cash flow and finance. So a lot of these doctors had opened these clinics and really had even less of a clue about financial management than I did. At least I taught myself marketing. I was a member of Dan's mastermind group, so I understood how to get patients through the door. A lot of these doctors would just open, would put £150,000 into opening a clinic, lease everything, because they were doctors, they'd have a reasonable credit rating, and the leasing companies will go, professional person, doctor, will lend you whatever you want. Basically, so all these doctors could open these clinics, lease everything in the building, and not have any capital outlay other than maybe some fit-out works. And so one Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from the franchisor who's based in Leeds. Said, "Yeah, we've got a bit of a problem. Because we'd got the Newcastle clinic was successful. We were probably their biggest franchisee at that point, biggest single clinic, buying the most food off them under license. And I got the phone call saying, that clinic we opened in Carlisle." I said, yeah. He says, well, we've got a bit of a problem. He's not paying us, and he's got like 40 grand's worth of stock. So he must be doing all right. He must be have loads of patients because he's bought all this stock and he keeps buying stock. So we're assuming he's selling it and he must have patients, but he's not paying us. And he says he's struggling getting patients, which we can't understand because he keeps buying stock from us, which we've let him have on credit. So I was like, okay, well, we wondered, could you go and speak to him and tell him how it's what you're doing at Newcastle, and see if you can help him. May even be an opportunity for you to become, maybe take a part of his business or become a business partner with him as a joint venture. Well, I live in Carlisle, but our clinic's in Newcastle, which for the geographically challenged is opposite sides of the country. The Carlisle is 300,000 people. It's more sheep than people. We've got there's a huge area. I mean, our patients, you can drive from West Cumbria, which is where Sellafield is, and cousins marry cousins. There's an hour and a half drive to our clinic, and you're not even near the M6 at that point to get down south. So it's a huge area. So when I was given the opportunity to open a clinic, I decided I didn't want to open it in my hometown because I didn't think the opportunity was big enough. Somebody else, 12 months later, comes along, this doctor, and he opens a clinic. And it sounded like I'd made the right decision because the area clearly wasn't big enough because he wasn't getting patients. So I got the introduction, went to see him, and as I walked in the door, I'd never met him before. I'd spoken to him a couple of times on the phone. As I walked in the door, he put his hand out. He said, "Hello, Chris, I'm really nice to meet you. I will give you 50% of my business." It's like, whoa, steady on, tiger. It's like, we've not even had a cup of coffee and we're going back to, you're inviting me back to the hotel room here. My mum warned me about girls like you. There was just an absolute desperation because he'd done what a lot of business owners do, and he'd confused. I could just borrow all this money. He'd leased everything in the building. It was beautiful. It's a convert, and the roll to the end is, we now own the Carlisle clinic. But I went And I sat down with him and I did what Dan had done 12 months earlier with me when I'd phoned him from Belfast and said, I need to come and see you, explain business finance to me because it's like mine, I don't get it and it's broken. And I went down and did exactly the same with the doctor at Carlisle. And we just said, look, I said, if we put 3 years of hard work into this and neither of us take any money out, then we can turn it round and we'll turn it into a profitable business. But you've created, by all these leases, which by the way you've personally guaranteed, because I'd looked through the paperwork, he'd just signed anything that his clinic manager had put in front of him. So he'd signed personal guarantees on just about everything. Some stuff was like serious personal guarantees, like secured against assets that he'd got, things like he'd got he owned part of the clinic, and so there was all sorts of like shenanigans that the leasing companies, particularly the fit out company, had said, oh, why don't you have a nice new floor upstairs? Well, the one upstairs was completely serviceable. It was a nice blue, similar carpet tiles to this. The leasing company said, well, it's only another 40 quid a week and you can have all nice new shiny carpet tiles upstairs. So it's like, oh, 40 quid a week. His secretary, his office admin girls said, yeah, fine. His clinic manager, he called him. He said, can you just sign this? Just sign this. And £400,000 worth of leases, included the building lease, which the building lease was signed on the worst commercial terms I've seen, and I was in commercial property for 10 years before I got into the healthcare industry. It was signed on the worst commercial terms I'd ever seen. He properly had his hat nailed on. He'd not taken proper legal advice. He'd just basically just taken the landlord's word that it's a nice shiny new lease, just sign it. It's a 5-year lease. He'd basically taken on the responsibility for everything on the building, internal, external. And one thing I have learned is like 2 things not to buy cheaply. Like one is legal advice and the other is sausages.
Because I want to get onto the bigger deal, the more recent deal. What was the punchline? What did you end up getting Carlisle for?
So I spoke to him and I said, like, we could both work in this for 3 years, absolutely solid, and then we'll be able to start taking some money out because we'll have paid down this debt. So it's the business itself, the business model is great, but you've just created this massive amount of debt. He said, okay. I said, how much time can you put in? A day a week. I said, well, that's not really going to work because you're going to need to be here. I'm going to run the Newcastle clinic. You're going to need to be here running this clinic because you can't afford the clinic manager that you've got now that you're paying about 35 grand a year for doing, you've not even got any patients yet. He's got maybe 6 patients. He's got a full-time front of house team of about 4. He's got 3 therapists, and it was just an absolute catastrophe. I said, you need to basically just cut right back in 2 therapists maximum, maybe 1 sort of admin assistant. You need to let the clinic manager go, and you need to be in the clinic as the business owner. But I'm a GP. I've got to run my GP practice. I said, well, and how will I get paid for the day I'm putting in? I said, no, I think you might be like, let me start again. We'll rewind on that. I was like, so I went over it and it clearly just wasn't going in. He completely misunderstood. But that's the institutionalised NHS attitude. We'll build it and they will come. So he built the clinic as the NHS do. You build a new cancer wing on a hospital, patients just come and fill it. And that's the attitude that unfortunately a lot of medical professionals have when they open their own businesses. You see it a lot with aesthetics, Botox and fillers and that sort of thing. They get a clinic, they buy all the latest equipment, and then nobody turns up because they don't understand the marketing. The end outcome was we introduced him to an insolvency practitioner who had the same opinion as me, like, this is knackered. Like, you're going to work for 5 years, basically write it off and we'll do it. You'll have to enter into not a company voluntary arrangement, is it? An IVA? Yeah, thank you. An IVA with the creditors to stop them coming after you. And ultimately that's what he did. And he walked away from the business and just left it.
And how much did you get? You walked into the clinic.
Yeah.
And how much did you pay for walking into a fitted out clinic that had X £100,000 spent on?
Nothing. 0. Yeah.
It's not quite
there
true.
is well
What
there
you
is
have
one
to do with
advantage.
landlord?
There is one advantage of Carlisle. So I mentioned before it's a converted barn, and the farmer who owned the barn lived in the farmhouse about across the road, about 50 metres from the farm. So being Carlisle, everybody knows everybody. So I made 2 phone calls and I said I need to know who knows this farmer and can give me an introduction to him, because I'd like to take on the lease. I know that he's not being paid by, because I've seen the accounts, I know he's not being paid by his existing tenant. He just wants his rent paying. Within 3 hours and 2 phone calls, I'm sat in the front room having a cup of tea with him and his wife, and we shook hands on a deal, a newly negotiated deal for me to lease the building in its entirety, on the strict understanding that he changed the locks that night, which he was completely entitled to do under the lease. He could kick the tenant out if he hadn't paid for 14 days. And I said the lease was bad. So the tenant hadn't paid for 14 days, he could change the locks and kick him out, which is exactly what he did. The tenant wasn't bothered. He's done with it. He's had enough. He's speaking to his insolvency practitioner. So I then spent so when I said I spent nothing, I didn't. I basically had to make the landlord good for his rent, which was a quarter in arrears, and I paid him a quarter up front. So we made good the rent, which was about 7k.
And how much worth of fit out did you inherit?
£200,000. Yeah.
£200,000 cookie cutter of his own business.
We had, I mean, and the lesson, a big lesson for me learnt was like how poor some of these leasing companies are, and to them, £40,000 or £50,000 piece of equipment, they just want to come back, and particularly when they've got a personal guarantee, they're not bothered what that sells for. If they sell it for £1,000 and it's worth 50,000, firstly they don't know what these things are worth, because they're generally very specialised bits of kit. So we had all sorts of bailiffs and stuff turning up demanding, and they'd wave a bit of paper and say, we want this piece of equipment. Say, absolutely no problem. I'd agreed with the insolvency practitioner that we'd lock it all in a room, and then when people came to collect it, because there were a couple of bits that were useful to us, which we did do a deal with the leasing company for, but there were lots of other bits that weren't. But they turn up with these bits of paper, wrong serial numbers, no signatures, no court orders, and we ended up left with several £1,000s, several tens of thousands of pounds worth of equipment, which over the period of the next 12 months, the insolvency practitioner says, yep, 12 months has gone, you can just dispose of it yourself now if nobody's come to collect it. So when I say we spent zero, it took me 12 months basically to get back just by selling the equipment.
So to accelerate this forward in time, let's talk about the recent dramatic upheaval. So Chris recognised that there was a weakness in his business, so it grew to, I don't know, 1.5, 2 million in revenue?
1.5, yeah.
So 1.5 million revenue, was profitable, but there was always this constraint. And the constraint was he was operating under licence, and they were giving different areas to different territories, and therefore if Chris wanted to exit, while the business didn't depend on Chris, theoretically he could sell it. Any knowledgeable buyer is going to want to know, because the strength of the business hangs on this licence agreement. And yet there was all kinds of issues, because there was the original licensor was in Holland, as Chris mentioned, and they had like a master licensor in the UK. And then in amongst all this, so Chris was saying, well, how do I strengthen this? Do I break away and stop using their methodology, and do I create my own proprietary one? Do I create my own proprietary food? But of course that all takes capital outlay, and there's risk, and we might get sued if we do that. If it's right, and so Chris was, on paper, after X many years, it was solid, it was profitable, but it was limited for growth. And then the Dutch and the UK master licensee fell out, and if I get this right way around, they fell out, they had a lawsuit, and it ended up that the UK licensor won. Is that right?
Yeah, they settled out of court, but again, like legal fees, both sides incurred €1 million actually, because it was fought in the Dutch courts, €1 million each of legal fees, fighting something that, and the end settlement that they reached, as they both had pretty much run out of money to fight this legal battle, was negotiated by a barrister in the UK. Who's actually I've now got him on our board. and he negotiated a settlement of €250,000. Might need to edit that bit out actually.
You're going to edit that bit out.
Not to edit that. He negotiated an agreement that was the same figure that they had, that the UK company had proposed in the first place 12 months before either of them had spent £1 million on legal fees.
There's a lesson hiding in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So
court, like going legal is like just I've seen it, and I've seen it on more than one occasion now. It's just an absolute last resort. It's just sit down and negotiate with people first, and there's always a negotiation to be done, and get professional mediators to do it. Like there are people like Guy Tritton, our barrister, who does this for a living. He prides himself on not having to go to court and deal with this stuff, because it's just a big gravy train.
So the UK ended up with being the master.
Yeah. So now the UK is its own. We had a brand change. So the original treatment was called Alizone. It came to the UK, and the master franchisee in the UK rebranded it as Alivere. Very similar treatment. We improved the food, we changed the ultrasound, we updated the ultrasound treatment that we do for some more modern technology, and now we've got the components of the 4 components of the programme: a nutrition programme, an ultrasound treatment, a skin tightening treatment, and when we've at Silverlink Clinics developed a very robust maintenance programme to help patients once they've finished the programme. It generates they become a lifetime patient in the same way you would if you had any other serious medical illness. You generally would go back for checkups. So we've got these 4 elements to the programme, and we've badged it all, we've wrapped it all up, and it's called Alivere.
So but at the time, this was Chris's licensor, and it was the biggest risk and limitation on Chris's growth. Ultimately,
yeah. So every month we'd do a SWOT analysis. It sounds odd, but it sounds maybe overkill. I think it's just, for me, just looking at that every month, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, every single month for like from month 1 in the business, the biggest threat, number 1 threat, was always licensee or franchisor takes away franchise from us for whatever reason. They could either decide that they see we've built a really successful franchise model, our franchise business, and they go, we could have that. We could have the profit that they're making running the franchise by making something up and taking the franchise off them. And the Dutch were quite difficult to deal. They were quite challenging to deal with, and would find various reasons why different clinics weren't doing things just quite right. And you always felt under threat that this business I've built up over 2 years could have just been snatched away.
So bring us into present day now, because ultimately Chris played a masterstroke. He took the biggest threat that was the biggest challenge and ended up doing a deal, and I'll be non-specific and let Chris be as specific as he wants to be, whereby now has an interest in Alivere. So when Chris says we now have this, we now have that, it's because he became an acquired or did a deal over the business. So Silverlink still exists and Alivere still exists, so now you've got a much bigger, you've gone from 2 clinics to how many clinics are across?
Yeah, so we've got, so previously Silverlink Clinics had 4 clinics in the northeastern Cumbria, so Berwick, Stockton, Newcastle and Carlisle. Berwick, Stockton, Newcastle, Carlisle, yeah. And then Alivere themselves had a Leeds clinic, a Harrogate clinic and a Mayfair clinic in London, all doing round about the same individual. So if class Leeds and the Leeds business and the Harrogate business are sort of one area, if you like, and they were doing about the same as the Newcastle businesses, the Silverlink clinics, and London equally does the same. So the 3 different entities were similar sizes.
So ultimately you eliminated risk and grew the business radically, because obviously Alivere's got the income from the food, which was sold to all the clinics throughout the network, but also they ran their own clinics.
Yeah.
And then Silverlink's had clinics.
So it's a nice simple structure now. So we've got a holding company, which the founder of Alivere in the UK, Dr. Palmer, owns half, and I own half. That's pretty much, you can go on company's house and see that.
And how
and the structure underneath, and this is where I realised the value of, and again it comes back to the built to sell book. the value of my business. So even though the Alivair business was at least double the size of mine, you know, they were doing knocking on 4 million, and we were knocking on, at the time we did the deal, we were knocking on 2 million, you know, so they were double the size, and yet because of my systems, procedures, operating manuals, the culture that we'd built within the business, we were able to effectively balance the business to make it so attractive to the franchisee, the franchisor, that we were able to do a 50-50 merger, even though the businesses were different sizes. But you can't put the intellectual property, and this was, you know, the difference, that effectively £2 million difference in turnovers, and balance sheets is about the same. The balance sheet's about twice the size, you know, it's twice the net assets we've got. What doesn't show on the balance sheet is all the systems, and sometimes you don't realise the value of that, and it's only when you document it and you show somebody and go, this is why we're your biggest franchisee, because these are the systems we've got.
So in a minute I'm going to hand it over to you guys for questions, but before, I've got 3 questions, I think, which will go single sentence answers.
I'm not great at them.
So number 1, so after you did this merger,
yep.
How much did the combined, if Silverlink was at 1.5 million, what did the revenue increase to, roughly?
6 million.
Okay, good. How much did and you can say it in percentage terms if you don't want to say a monetary amount, how much did the profit increase by?
Yeah, so net profitability's doubled basically.
Okay.
It's more than double, because a lot of the net profit is in the distribution business. Is gross profit wise is very profitable, but there's very low overhead for running the distribution part of the business.
Good. So one of the reasons there was Chris's valuation was higher is ultimately because it was run much more profitably than the parent. So part of Chris's job now is to bring the larger company into better margins. Okay, but so you managed to 4x your revenue, significantly increase your profitability. So Chris's share of the combined merged entity is much more valuable than what he had before. How much did this cost you to acquire the stake in this much bigger entity?
I mean, in terms of me writing a cheque for the others, again, you know, there's a pattern here, 0. But it's the thousands of pounds of investment in the systems and the processes that I guess were double. But, you know, we'd not invested, you know, we'd certainly not invested what was it for ultimately, I guess, a £2 million difference. We'd not invested 2 million quid in it. We'd added value to it. We'd taken lots of different bits, bolted it together into a system, and the sum of the parts, the sum of the whole was a lot greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, so for me, this is why this was a masterstroke, and I'll throw it over to you to ask any questions. But why it was a masterstroke was it was the biggest threat to the business. It limited Chris's valuation if he was going to exit it himself, and it was also impeding his growth because the licensor had control over what areas you could open clinics. And then by doing this deal with effectively the parent co, the licensor, it meant that now Chris has got control over those elements. Is it CEO your job title?
Yeah.
Okay, so Chris is CEO. So the shareholder, the co-shareholder Chris has got is retired or semi-retired?
Yeah, he lives in Spain. He's medical director. He's the medical brains. Yeah.
So he's removed the risks and radically increased the revenues and profitabilities, and in cash terms, as in a point of closing, he's acquired a much more valuable company that he could now exit, and it didn't cost him any of his own capital. So I think that's a pretty damn good achievement. So first of all, give Chris a round of applause. Thank you. So over to you. Questions, thoughts, comments? Ed.
Sorry, this was a little bit technical, but do you put on your balance sheet your goodwill?
So there's a great question which is hotly debated by HMRC, and there is a technical answer. So when we merged the two companies, the safest way to do it, we could have just merged, but there would potentially be a fairly significant capital gain implication on my part, because I'm being given 50% of a £4 million company in return for 50% of a £2 million company. So the difference is taxable as a capital gain, potentially. And this was a massive learning for me, that you can basically get sign off from HMRC and not necessarily put it down as goodwill, but by merging the two companies together in the way we did, and it is fairly technical. It's it's £12,000 worth of accounting advice to get to where we've got. It is fair, it is technical, but it's doable, and you basically get HMRC to say, yeah, we agree to this deal, we agree the value you've put on this goodwill. So we balanced the companies, we made the companies worth the same amount in our submission to HMRC, and which is justified, which is genuinely justifiable.
And Ed, so obviously not being situation specific, but I'd say a £12,000 accountancy fee beats a £400,000 capital gain.
Yeah, just to put it, because absolutely the capital gain would be knocking on £250,000 if we'd just done it and they said, yeah, you've got £2 million to pay even entrepreneurs relief at 10%. I'm paying 200,000, and it could potentially be more than that.
These dental practices and medical practices are basically cash flow and balance sheet insolvent. So because they have an NHS contract, their goodwill says that they're
and there'll be set ways, and there are set ways of valuing that type of goodwill, and again, with ours being a medical business and more specifically a franchise business, there are ways of valuing that franchise that are probably more robustly able to be argued than maybe some other businesses where you just, you're selling, I don't know, a widget manufacturer to another widget manufacturer, and you say, oh, the widget, we haven't got contracts, but these guys have bought off us for years, so we're going to add goodwill to the value of 10 million quid. That's probably a lot more difficult to argue with the revenue than our position.
Well, and just to jump in, I don't think it's necessary for those that eyes are glazing over for talking about balance sheets as it relates to medical practices. I don't think it is about medical practices. I think the common theme for everybody in here that I want to drive as a takeaway from this session is it's a different strategy for growth. You can grow through acquisition. I mentioned earlier when my a business that I had that doubled in 7, doubled in 8, doubled in 9 in turnover. What I didn't say is, while I did things in that business, actually, I bought another business that was complementary. I didn't merge the two, right? So the original business doubled again, but the business I acquired had a massive database and good systems that allowed it to acquire customers for business B, but those customers for business B would also buy from business A. So actually, that strategy meant that I doubled again company A, and yet I bought company B at a fair price, and it was still profitable. So the stretching of your thinking is considering, and it may or may not come up. It's in one of the 3 speakers this afternoon that I know has done this. It may come up in more depth then. It's like, you know what, deals can be around. I mean, if you think of the context of Chris and Carlisle, got 200,000's worth of fit out equipment, etc., for nothing. It was an acquisition of sorts, distressed acquisition, but it was an acquisition. If you think about, all right, he solved a big risk in the business, but actually he has given him much more opportunity for growth and realised massive value by an acquisition. And how do you forge that out? And it's a very different route that you could go down for growth. And actually, if you think, oh, it's technical boundary, ultimately we're trying to develop companies that could be sold. Chris may not want to sell, Paul may not want to sell, may have no desire to sell whatsoever. But actually, if you want a company that's not dependent upon you, really, how do you get it into shape so that, while on paper, it may not have much, but so that a potential acquirer can really see the value? Because actually, it is there, but you need to know how to position that and not leave yourself in the position that the Carlisle doctor had himself in.
And just pick up on what Paul said this morning about challenging yourself in terms of your belief of where you can be and what you can achieve. you know, Dan had identified, you know, long before I ever believed it'd be even a remote possibility. Like, why don't you buy the franchisor? It's like, don't be ridiculous. It's like the massive, you know, you know, at the time we were maybe doing 1.2 million. They were at 4 million. So they're nearly like 4 times as big as we were. It's like, don't, you know, yeah, nice idea, but no, you know, we need to rule it out. And it's like that constantly being around a room of people who think bigger than you and constantly challenge your limiting beliefs is like that for me. Like, that's the benefit, and that's why I've been around down a mastermind and private mentoring and coaching for 8 years, because you don't see, you're so close to it, you don't see sometimes what could be the obvious stuff.
Very good. Other questions? Paul?
Key takeaway for me from that is actually sitting down and writing procedures and everything is worth £2 million.
Yeah. I mean, I love systemizing stuff. You know, and my wife, drives my wife mad. Everything's got a box at home. It's like, why are the keys on that one and not that one? It's almost OCD, but hey, it's £2 million worth of OCD. I'll live with that.
There is value there. There is massive value. Any final questions? Josh?
What were some of like the more tactical things you did to actually go about writing those manuals and getting your systems in place?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of like not starting from a blank page. So write down the headings. So take yourself, if you've got a service business or even any business really, walk your way as a customer, walk your way through your business and say, right, what's the first thing that happens? So the first thing that happens is, you know, we need to put an advert out to get that customer. So walk your way through how do we create the advert? Where do we go for the advert? What does the advert look like? Have we got a library of previous adverts that we've run that we know have worked? Then when we've assumed we attracted a patient, how did we attract that patient? Who did they speak to? What process? Is there a structure to the sales conversation that works better than another structure that we've tried? So we tried and tested several different, not scripts, because I'm not a big fan of sales scripts as such. Done well, they can sound really natural, but done poorly, it just sounds like somebody's reading a script. But I'm a big fan of structure. So a bullet point, you know, an A4 bullet pointed list of these are the points you need to go through when we make these sales phone calls. So structuring the sales process, and suddenly what you find is the manual becomes, you don't sit down to write, you know, the 7,200 page manual for running your business. It's written a page at a time. You know, we have a thing in the business. If a process won't fit on an A4 page in bullet point form at 14 point type, then it's 2 processes. You know, it's that, and that just works out so true, because then you can give somebody the A4 sheet and go, that's the process for doing that, and then it goes in the manual. I mean, now we've got, you know, we have a software system called Talent LMS, which is which we put this stuff on because it is so hard. Particularly now we've got a franchise network of 30 or 40 franchise clinics around the country, including our own. To update these manuals, these things just sit on the shelf and become dusty. Whereas with an online system, the platform we've chosen, and it's not an expensive one. You know, you can read it on your mobile. It'll let you do training for the staff. You know, just I was getting very tactical now, but that to answer the question, just work through one process at a time. You know, like the whole how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Pick the one thing and just set yourself a task. If you do one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and these things should only take you, you know, not even an hour most of the time to write that A4 sheet, you know, 14 point text, bullet pointed on A4 sheet, title at the top. That's a process.
Very good. So Chris, final question for you. If there was only just one key takeaway you wanted to make sure these guys underline and asterisk in their notebooks at the end of today from your session, what would it be?
So as the business has grown, the most important question I've started asking is, rather than how can I do it, because I'm a bit of an OCD control freak with stuff. I've now started asking who can I get to do it. So being prepared, and it's not always just about spending money. Sometimes you've got talent in the business that you just don't know that's there until you give them the task to do it. You know, we had a receptionist, we had a patient coordinator, we call them, but we had a receptionist to all intents and purposes. Lovely girl, clearly bright, paperwork was always in order, patients loved her, and I said, oh, can you just proofread one of our brochures? I'm just about to have it to print. And we'd had a cup of coffee and she said she'd got an English degree and she loved writing, and that was a hobby at weekend, she'd write short stories. I said, all right, so how do you fancy writing some like of our sales copy and stuff like that? And so she started, because it's a process, I'd had it on my list to do, write this 52-week nurture sequence. But to write these 52 well-crafted professional emails that we were going to send to patients that didn't necessarily, to people who inquired but hadn't become patients, it was always just bumped down the list. But when I asked, who can I get to do it rather than how can I do it, it identified Leanne. In fact, Paul met Leanne. She came to that meeting that Paul and I had. And she then wrote the amazing 52-week, and that 52-week nurture campaign now that's in Infusionsoft is responsible for probably 4 or 5 patients a month that just come back as a result of, 6 months later they get that email, because it's all in Infusionsoft, £3,000 average lifetime value of a patient, because I'd asked, who can I get to do that, instead of leaving it on my desk to do.
Very nice. Give a round of applause for Chris Mathews.
Thank you.